The goal for each podcast episode is for us to be honest, open, and transparent. While conversations do include mental health, this show does not replace support from a licensed mental health professional. If you feel triggered by any of these conversations, please feel free to take a break from the episode and check in with your support system.
I will say, of course, stigma I would always put as number one, and the way you described your story reflects a lot of students that end up going to HBCUs or predominantly Black colleges in general. The not knowing how to name it, just in general, like I don't know, like there can't be anything wrong with me. I've seen my parents just not even knowing that your parents probably dealt with the same thing. They just also didn't name it and didn't really address it. And also the stigma of, religion being the way that you do fix anything that is that is wrong. And you mentioned it slightly, the not prioritizing yourself or thinking about you, because you even mentioned your younger siblings as being the role model for them. So it's like, I don't have time to be depressed. I don't have time for this. I have other people looking up to me and whatnot. So
what's going on, everyone? Thank you all so much again for tuning in to another episode of the Unlearn the Lies About Mental Health, the podcast. I am your host, Abraham Scully, and you are tuned into the podcast for young adults and leaders in education who want to learn how to create safe spaces for honest dialogue about mental health. And as you know, in every episode that we have brought to you, it gets hot, right? It gets honest, it gets open, we get transparent. And the goal is to be able to provide value for you, and appreciation for you listening to the podcast, subscribing to the show, but more importantly, giving you practical tools and strategies that you can utilize to best support your students and create a campus of care and further promote conversations about mental health. So without further ado, just as every conversation, I have an amazing guest that I want to introduce to you all. Victoria Smith, how are you?
I am good. Thank you so much for asking me to be here. I'm so excited.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited for you to be here as well. We were talking a little bit before I hit record, and I got to see you facilitate a panel discussion not too long ago, and I was very much impressed with your ability to facilitate that, but then also your background and some of the work that you have been doing and what you are currently involved in. So it only makes sense to bring you onto the show and introduce you to our listeners. So if you can just briefly introduce yourself, who are you? What do you do? Who do you do it for? Why do you do it? Just give us kind of that overview of who Victoria Smith is.
Well, I will say overview of Victoria Smith. Named Victoria Smith. What do I do currently? I am a strategy analyst at UNCF's Institute for Capacity Building. UNCF is a United Negro College Fund, mainly known for like their scholarships and things of that nature. But the Institute for Capacity Building is specifically focused on the transformation or building on the transformative legacy of HBCUs. And the why and the who do I do it for are a little bit intertwined because I am a product of HBCUs. I went to Howard University for undergraduate. Both of my parents are HBCU alum. And I just believe generally, I believe in the importance of HBCUs in the Black community. I believe in their legacy. I believe in the future that they have. So that is the who I do it for as well. I do it for the people that came before me and laid the groundwork. And I also do it to make sure that generations to come have the same transformative experience that I've been able to have and that people before me were able to have. Yes. And in a past life, I was an attorney full-time. I do it part-time now.
Got you. Awesome. Well, thanks for that introduction. And it's exciting. I didn't go to an HBCU, and there are so many opportunities that I have to either meet faculty or staff who work for HBCUs or students. And it's always interesting for me to get a chance to kind of hear about the experience going to an HBCU, working at an HBCU, and it sounds amazing. And I'm curious to hear from you, especially in the work that you're doing as it relates to mental health. We are talking about mental health, but regarding what you have been seeing over the last couple of years and hearing over the last couple of years, what's the state of Black mental health for students at HBCUs?
Yeah, well, it's a bit like of a mixed bag. So
Sure.
HBCU students, like any other students, like they're not immune to the challenging times, with COVID and things of that nature, in general. But as a Black person, so that's overall whether you're an HBCU student or a PWI student that's Black, we exist at like the intersection of racism, classism, health inequity, separate and apart from being a student. So all of that is already there. But on campus, there's limited accessibility sometimes just due to historic factors and like stigma in general. But the student themselves are pretty unique as well. Like still over half of HBCU students are first generation. About 70% of them are Pell eligible. So, that comes with its own set of personal burdens, which is like financial stressors and like the Black tax, I think that it's called every now and then, with the thinking of everybody else in your family who you're there for. And the legacy can sometimes be overwhelming as well. And you tend not to put yourself first. But we still find though with HBCU students, if you graduate from an HBCU, you're 51% more likely to move into a higher socioeconomic quartile, said that wrong. And also you tend to leave with a stronger sense of self. So it's really interesting because you're still a Black student there. There's the historical factors of an HBCU and the systematically being under-resourced, but we still see that there are positive effects on the students' mental health and their socioeconomic growth going to an HBCU. So it's definitely mixed.
Got you. Thanks for sharing that. And it's interesting you say that with the percentage of Black students who do graduate from HBCUs, their sense of self, increases. I'm curious to know why that is. Why do you think that is, and what's happening on these specific campuses that may or may not be happening on, PWIs or, in these other environments that allows Black students to feel more confident or assured and aware of themselves to then thrive post graduating from these colleges?
Yeah, I would say that HBCUs are special in that your faculty, your administration, the things that I described, the having the intersection of racism, classism, health inequities, things of that nature, and even background, that is reflected in your faculty, staff, administration. So it usually gives a more familial feel, and it allows you to see yourself everywhere that you look. You also learn that, I'll say for me personally, it seems as though, society will push that there's a monolith when it comes to Black people, like being Black, this is how you are, this is what you're like. Going to Howard, I was able to see that we are so different. I'm originally from Atlanta, Georgia, but meeting somebody from like Jersey or meeting somebody from Florida, like Miami-Dade County, that they're completely different than me. So I would say being able to see yourself, experience different cultures within your cultures, certain things you don't have to worry about because there's already a level of understanding that exists and the sense of community is there. I'm saying this is somebody that I went to a HBCU for undergrad, but I went to PWI for law school. And those are just the differences that I personally noticed.
Got you. So I'm actually first generation college graduate, and I went to a predominantly white institution. And now that I hear you talking about kind of seeing yourself in the role of someone who is quote unquote successful or thriving in some capacity, that does make a difference. And I don't think I did this consciously, but when I did arrive on campus, I was immediately attracted to other people that looked like me. And thankfully, I was exposed to TRIO, which is a federally funded program. For those of you who are listening and are not aware, but essentially, TRIO is a program where it provides support for first generation students, low income students with disabilities, and they have many different programs depending on what level of education you're at. But I was blessed to have a TRIO program on my campus, and majority of the staff and even students who were a part of the TRIO program, they look like me. Now, the TRIO program wasn't specifically designed for people who are Black or, but to talk about certain issues, I felt comfortable, spending time with these people and getting to know these people. And it did allow me to have a sense of belonging, even though I was 700 miles away from home on a predominantly white institution. So as you're sharing this, it kind of makes sense to me. Like now looking back, I didn't do it on purpose, but I was kind of just drawn to that because I could see myself accomplishing XYZ, and it made sense. But you said something about the stigma and how sometimes that can be a barrier for seeking support. And I definitely resonate with that. Those who are listening to the podcast, you've heard me share my story a ton of times. But for you, Victoria, I'll share just a little bit. I grew up in a Jamaican household, a Christian household in Miami. And I moved to Pensacola, Florida, so Northwest Florida, for college. And that first year for me was completely amazing because now I was in an opportunity to be independent, figure things out, and also kind of create a blueprint for my younger siblings who also may want to go to college at some point. But although it was super exciting and I had a plan and I had goals and I was ambitious, I didn't consider the fact that I would experience mental health challenges. And so I was overwhelmed with stress because I was working full-time student, all of the things. And I never saw my parents make any excuses because of work. So I obviously didn't make any excuses. And I just chalked the stress that I was experiencing. I just chalked it up as this is what it's supposed to feel like. This is what you're supposed to push through. And I did that as long as I could until I couldn't do that any longer. And I remember going from being this enthusiastic student to being super down and isolating myself. And I didn't know I was depressed because I didn't have a name for it. But then I had a best friend of mine who saw the signs. She reached out and she said, hey, it looks like you may be depressed. We have a counseling center. You should talk to somebody. And long story short, after, fighting the fear, the stigma, the shame associated with possibly being depressed for real, I ended up sitting down with a professional and was diagnosed with major depressive disorder. So that started me on this journey of depression is a real thing. Depression can be treated. And if I'm willing to do the work necessary to support my mental health, I can get better. But for many students who are Black students, whether you are on, you're at a HBCU or not, there's still that shame that exists. And it's very important for those students to see someone who looks like them talking about the fact that maybe they were at that point as well, and they were able to seek support and get help, in the areas of mental health. But I'm curious to know, you talked about the stigma and the shame associated with mental health, but are there any other barriers that you see exist on, I guess we could talk about, at HBCUs, but just in general, that you like to share?
Yeah, I will say, of course, stigma I would always put as number one. And the way you described your story reflects a lot of students that end up going to HBCUs or predominantly Black colleges in general. The not knowing how to name it, just in general, like I don't know, like there can't be anything wrong with me. I've seen my parents just not even knowing that your parents probably dealt with the same thing. They just also didn't name it and didn't really address it. Um, and also the stigma of, you know, religion being the way that you do fix anything that is anything that is wrong. And you mentioned it slightly, the not prioritizing yourself or thinking about you, because you even mentioned your younger siblings as being the role model for them. So it's like, I don't have time to be depressed. Like, I don't have time for this. I have other people looking up to me and whatnot. So stigma would have been my number one, but your story like covered it completely. I mentioned a little bit earlier the lack of like access when you asked, you know, the state of mental health for Black students. And I mentioned that it was systematic, but I'm a numbers person, sometimes statistics. In 2020, a survey was done, and the 10 largest HBCU endowments are about $2 billion, whereas the 10 largest PWI endowments are $200 billion combined. Wow. So the gap is huge, and it's always been that way, unfortunately. And that's not to say that HBCUs don't try their best with like the resources that they have and have not, obviously, like I said before, with the, you know, the successes that HBCUs have and the amount of students that they graduate is astronomical for the position that they're in. But the systematic under resource, like the lack of resources systematically, it's there, and it's something that's been persistent. Also, a big one is lack of trust when it comes to the medical field in general. There's usually not great communication. We maybe don't know how to communicate what's going on with us in a way that the medical field learns how to diagnose. And then sometimes things aren't culturally responsive. So, for example, I've done some research into this topic, specifically at Morehouse School of Medicine. They talk about consolidating resources. So people don't like Black people generally. It's been shown that they have an aversion to going to the doctor. So as opposed to having to go to your doctor that takes care of you physically, that doctor also having a few questions that they can ask about the patient's mental health. So then the patient doesn't have to go from their primary physician to another specialist to talk to them about something else that is wrong. Because like, I didn't want to come to the doctor in the first place. Like, I don't trust having to talk to all of these people. I know my personal physician. I'm comfortable talking to that person as opposed to having them bounce around. So, you know, the biggest ones I would say, just to summarize, it would be lack of trust with the medical system in general, medical field, and their lack of responsiveness and understanding, the stigma that you were able to articulate in your story, as well as the lack of access within the realm of HBCUs and how they've been systematically under-resourced, but also the community as a whole, how there's a lack of accessibility outside of the education system that exists within HBCUs.
So much to unpack with what you shared, for real. And if we had time, we would definitely go through each of those. We'll probably have to have you on for another episode if that's, you know, but I'm not going to put you on the spot yet. But okay, so I want to focus on this part. You mentioned the gap when it comes to resources. That is a big difference. You said 200 billion and for predominantly white institutions.
So the largest PWI endowments.
Got you.
Are the top 10 largest PWI endowments are $200 billion. The top 10 top 10 largest HBCU endowments equal $2 billion.
Got you. So give us a short summary of or understanding of endowment. What is an endowment and what does that mean for the institution?
So for the institution, just an endowment in general, that's just how much, like the resources that the school has, like they use this for operations, for building facilities, things of that nature. That's just the large pool of money that the school has. Like it's their bank a little bit.
Got you.
Probably
Got
explained
you.
a little bit off, but
No, you're
maybe
good.
very baseline. But that is the money that they have within them. So I'm sure like people will see certain institutions, PWI or HBCU, will get large gifts and things of that nature.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times those gifts will go to specific programs, but they don't necessarily go to the school as a whole. So they have to work within the confines of, if a corporation gives money for scholarships, it only goes to scholarships. It's not going to the school as a whole. Whereas some foundations will give to, oh goodness, we'll give to like a larger PWI specifically for research, but they'll just give them all of that money and say, oh, have it work, and then they'll be able to produce more research, and then the school gets money for the research and things of that nature, and that all goes towards their endowment. But the money that is poured into because it's not necessarily a larger PWI, but it's just the largest of the endowments. But the money that is poured into them is just not the same when it comes to HBCUs. There was a bit of a jump in 2020 with everything that was going on
Mm-hmm.
in the amount that was invested in HBCUs. But that survey is from 2020. That research study is from 2020. So even with the boost that was given because of the political unrest and things of that nature during 2020, it still isn't close, unfortunately, to PWI endowments. So it affects everything.
Yeah. And I think about any community, any organization, any institution, anyone doing anything, when you have a lack of resources, you almost have to figure out how can I get creative with what I do have? What types of partnerships or collaborations can I have or implement so that I can make up for the resources that I don't have. So in this case, I'm thinking specifically about HBCUs and some of the ways that they have to now get creative as it pertains to supporting their students' mental health. It's almost critical that certain organizations, agencies, funds exist to kind of help to make up for what's not there, which is why I really love what UNCF is doing, the United Negro College Fund is doing, and specifically Unapologetically Free, with the emphasis and focus on mental health, student well-being, because with initiatives like this, it helps to bridge the gap. It helps to provide additional resources. I'd love for you to share a little bit about Unapologetically Free. What is it for those who are curious to know what it's all about?
This podcast is powered by Speaks to Inspire, the mental health solution for young adults suffering in silence. Did you know that students who experience shame and hold negative perceptions about mental health conditions are less likely to reach out for help? By marrying the art of storytelling with mental health education, Speaks to Inspire is creating safe spaces through comprehensive, high-impact programs that help colleges, universities, and schools increase engagement and retention. Learn how you can bring a Speaks to Inspire speaker to your campus by visiting www.speakstoinspire.com/speakers.
So with Unapologetically Free, talking about the necessity for partnerships as we try to fill the gaps, we partnered with Thurgood Marshall College Fund as well as the Steve Fund in order to realize Unapologetically Free. We've also leaned in with Active Minds, which was the panel that you saw me moderating, and they've been wonderful with actually doing an entire research study focused on the different strategies that HBCUs have developed in order to fill in those gaps where maybe they don't have the resources there, being able to still provide mental health services in creative ways for their students. But with Unapologetically Free as a whole, we believe that, the history of HBCUs has been holistic. When they first started, it was because slaves didn't have anywhere else to go in order to learn. And it wasn't just learning a particular skill set or anything like that. It was preparing them to be like in the world. So that was, holistic learning. So with that, the concept of Unapologetically Free is to renew focus on mental health specifically. It came out of the outcry of 2020 specifically. It really made people just in general reshift focus. But it's to make sure that institutions are able to provide students with support and an inclusive environment in order for them to learn and thrive.
Awesome. So how is Unapologetically Free supporting these institutions? Is it through financial resources? Is it through making the connection with other agencies or institutions to be able to better understand the needs of these students, these Black students on Black colleges? What types of supports do these Black colleges have because of Unapologetically Free?
Well, in this first half of the year, what you're saying is the goal, 100%. But in the first half of the year, we wanted to focus on, like the individual mindset. So like we mentioned before, I would say one of the biggest barriers is the stigma. So that was our focus for the first half of the year. And we did that through webinars and workshops as well that were specifically targeted towards students and faculty. We also hosted a virtual student conference, which was very successful. We had over 300 students and they represented 50 different predominantly Black colleges and universities. Wow. And coming up soon, we are continuing on with our upcoming conference, which is called Unite 2023, where we will be assembling an advisory board to help weigh in on our general framework when it comes to Unapologetically Free, but our overall Institute for Capacity Building mental health initiative. So one of the major components that they'll be leaning in on is a research study that we are partnering with Healthy Minds Network. This survey is to the universities and colleges free of charge, where we are able to partner with the Healthy Minds Network to create a module that's specifically focused on Black students on Black college campuses. Because it is a very, like I mentioned before, it's a very unique experience to be in that type of environment. And then when doing research to inform programs and to help give dollars or find partners to help with the institutions, we don't really know we have an idea of what is needed, but it's always great to have data to back it up. And when looking at the landscape of the data to help back it up, we realized that it didn't really exist. Because we're not usually, unfortunately, focused on, we're not the default. And then when you focus on students of color, it's not usually students at predominantly Black institutions. So with the Healthy Mind Study, we've already developed and launched the survey, and we had our first cohort begin to administer it to their students. So we're in the process of looking at that data now. So we're super excited for that. And we're hoping to get even more information in the fall and We are looking to the advisory board, which includes mental health experts, faculty, students, retention specialists as well, to help us, gain perspective on what is needed and how we can help our students in the future.
That is amazing and very exciting. Like you mentioned, I'm curious to know, what does outreach look like and how Unapologetically Free is connecting with these Black colleges? Is there an active or strategic approach towards reaching out and getting them involved, or is it solely Black colleges who are aware of Unapologetically Free, they reach out and become a part of this? I think you mentioned cohort, or a college who is receiving this additional support. How does that work?
Gotcha. So with Unapologetically Free in general, just the webinars and the virtual student conference and the workshops, that is through our network. I will say UNCF is over 70 years old. We call it a legacy organization. So we are deeply rooted within the HBCU community. So the outreach is there. Like we have the connections there, but a lot of our campuses have, a lot going on. People on campus are usually multi-hyphenate. So not only are you a professor, you're also over this particular department and you have this and that responsibility. So we'll run into that every now and then, but because of the legacy of UNCF, it's trusted. So getting the attention and bringing people in is not very, thankful for the trust that we've been able to build within the HBCU and PBI community. When it comes to the actual surveys, we did specific, we use that network to say like, hey, we have this opportunity. We were able to have your institution participate in this survey. You get to keep all of the data that comes from this survey as well for your specific institution. And it's completely paid for. Healthy Minds Network is one of the largest organizations that disseminate surveys within higher education in general. So they're also a trusted name within the research space. So yeah, that's how we approach outreach. We have our upcoming, well, I know when this comes out, it'll be past, but we have our upcoming Unite 2023 convening, where the focus is delivering on the promise of Black higher education. And like I said, it's the dedication and the legacy precedes us. So that makes outreach a little bit more seamless than if we didn't have that. And like I said, we're really appreciative of the trust that the Black community has with UNCF and the programs that we have going.
Awesome. So I got a couple more questions. I want to be mindful of your time. So how can we eradicate mental health stigma? We've been talking about, one of the biggest barriers, and I believe that is absolutely right, as it pertains to even talking about mental health. It's like, nah, we don't even have those conversations, let alone, going to see a professional, right? So what are your thoughts on how we as a collective can eradicate the stigma that exists around mental health?
Well, eradicate sounds so huge. When you
Let's
say it
dream big.
Yes, in dreaming big, we've created a framework within like our general mental health initiative within UNCF and within the Department of the Institute for Capacity Building. And the steps that we are taking to move the needle in a positive direction, we are executing culturally relevant and ongoing mental health communication strategy to help shift the mindset of the Black community. So that's unapologetically free and things of that nature, talking to people directly, and the conference as well. developing a infrastructure that helps leverage like the historical and mission aligned organizations to create better community access and like a pipeline to Black mental health professionals, because that's something that's developing a mental health infrastructure that helps to leverage historical and mission aligned organizations to provide greater community access and to develop a pipeline of Black mental health professionals, because they are unfortunately in short supply right now. But going back to what we were talking about, the lack of trust with the medical field, seeing somebody like you in the room that you were talking to brings a sense of ease. And even when you say when you arrive to campus, being drawn to people that are similar to you, whether they are first generation or whether they, and then sometimes they happen to look like you as well. Increasing the access and utilization of mental health supports by Black students, faculty, staff, and once again, through partnerships to facilitate low cost or no cost mental health services. In the webinar, in partnership with Active Minds, we heard from one of our institutions that stated that they have a partnership with the medical school at a larger institution, and of no cost to the students on that particular HBCU campus, they're able to go to the medical school and work with the mental health professionals that are there. So that's just one example. And then finally is developing a research agenda to understand and articulate and amplify the impact of mental health on the Black community in general. And, you know, that goes back to what I was speaking on with the Healthy Minds Network, making sure that we fill in the gaps when it comes to research and helping to inform it and not letting other people tell our story, but being able to speak on the story on platforms like this and, you know, just in general, bringing people in to want to partner and knowing the impact that their partnership will have on the greater community as a whole.
Very well said.
That was a lot. I know that was a lot.
That was a lot of good stuff. So I hope we are taking notes. That framework, I believe, can help us to eradicate mental health stigma for sure.
I'm just trying to remain optimistic that we at least move the needle in a positive direction. Eradication is the ultimate goal. That is,
oh, for sure.
That would be a dream.
For sure, for sure. All right, final question. What is mental health to you?
To me personally, I would say that, you know, my personal mental health journey has made me even more passionate about doing this particular work. I have a whole bunch of different roles as a strategy analyst, but I'm very passionate about this particular initiative that I've been set up to help lead. But it is, for me personally, it's been a journey and promoting the journey of finding your true self and learning the tools to stand firmly in who that is, whether you go to an HBCU, whether you go to a PWI, whether you are Black or not. It's learning who you truly are and also consistently doing the work to maintain that and the coping mechanisms and things of that nature in order to maintain that balance and maintain that sense of self-care and take care of yourself, because it's so important. And, you know, you can't fill up anybody else's cup if you're on empty. So that's what mental health means to me personally.
100%. We talked about unapologetically free, and I'm sure listeners want to read a little bit more about the initiative and possibly get involved in some capacity. How can they get more information?
Yes. So for Unapologetically Free, specifically, the workshops I mentioned, the webinars, the Active Minds panel, as well as a resource book is available on unapologeticallyfree.org. I don't know if I'm able to when this comes out. I can give you the links or the as well as the link to the resources, like the
Yeah,
wellness journal. I don't know if you could put that
yeah,
in
yeah.
like
We
that.
could definitely do that.
So I can do that. Send that on over to you. But just in general, it's unapologeticallyfree.org, with UNCF, Institute for Capacity Building in general. It's at uncficb.org. And if you wanted more information on the conference, since this will be after the conference, a lot of the information that we discuss at the conference, excuse me, will be available on UNCF ICB as well. Yeah, we have YouTube videos if you look at UNCF ICB to see the work that we are doing generally. So yeah, those are the different places. I'll get all those links over to you.
Sure.
Make sure that they're available so people don't have to go hunt for it.
Sure, sure. So just to clarify, I just put it in really quickly. It's unapologetically-free.org. So don't forget the dash between unapologetically and free, or else you won't be able to find it.
Sorry.
So, but we will put that in the show notes as well, so you can just click rather than having to type it out. But if you prefer to type it out, don't forget the dash between unapologetically and free.
I'm on there so often that I can type the letter U in my search bar that it just automatically pops. That's on
I
me.
get it. I get it. No,
Please
you're
tell
good.
me.
You're good. You're good. So people may want to connect with you. Is that possible? What's the best way that they can connect with you, Victoria, on any platforms or anything like that?
Well, I am on LinkedIn, so you just search my name. It's Victoria Smith. You can find me through the UNCF Institute for Capacity Building page. I would encourage everyone to follow our social media page, and that's at UNCF ICB on all platforms. So that's LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, I believe now as well. And like I said, you can search us on YouTube, UNCF ICB. You can find videos on Unite there as well, which is our annual convening. And yeah, I think those are all the places. But yeah, for me, LinkedIn is the best.
Cool. I appreciate it. So for those of you listening, connect. There were so many valuable things shared during this episode, so I hope you received some value. Just to close this out, I want to share a few more resources by Speaks to Inspire. We do have our 14 ways to support students' mental health, the free guide. You can just check the link in the description and you can have access to that. Just download it, utilize it, share it with your colleagues. It's so important that we, number one, I believe, like you mentioned, Victoria, prioritize mental health for ourselves so that we are not burnt out and we're not pouring from an empty cup. And then when we are in that abundance and kind of overflow, we have an opportunity to recognize those who need that support and support our students. So we have that guide created just for that purpose of what are some ways that we can practically and creatively support students' mental health on campuses. So you can download that guide. Also, the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline is 988. So if you're listening to this and you know someone or you yourself may ever be in a crisis situation, you can reach out to a crisis counselor. It's 24/7 support. It's confidential, and you can call or text 988 and speak to someone immediately. And one thing I like to share with people is that you don't even have to be in crisis to reach out, right? It may be 3 a.m. in the morning. Your best friend is asleep. Parents are asleep. You have no one to talk to, but you need to talk to someone. You can call or text 988, right? So definitely take advantage of that resource. It's best to have the resource and not need it than to need it and not have it. So just lock it into your phone because you never know if you may ever need it. Finally, if you are not in our Facebook group, we do have a Facebook group with a bunch of other mental health advocates, experts, and also some of our guests who have been on this show are also in the Facebook group. So if you'd like to join, just search Unlearn the Lies About Mental Health on Facebook, hit that join button, and I will let you in. You can introduce yourself and let's continue the conversation there. So with all that being said, I want to thank you again for tuning in to another episode of this podcast. I hope it was valuable, and we'll talk to you next time. Take care.